what we are going to be talking about today is reversed tarot cards. So, this is something I have talked about a few times in the past. I actually have a blog post, which is one of my highest viewed blog posts that I wrote a few years ago, where I talked about the 4 most common methods that I use to read reversed cards. I don't want this to just be a reiteration of the blog post, but I did want to let you guys know if this is something you want to reference again in written format. You can Google Carrie Mallon reversed cards and you can find that blog post that I wrote a few years ago that has some similar information to what we're going to talk about today, but we're also going to go deeper into a few things today. And it's been, probably like 3 years since I wrote the blog post, so I think I have my thoughts have evolved a little bit as well, so it's not just going to be a repetition of that. This is also something that I talk about in the guidebook for the Spacious Tarot briefly, so if you have the Spacious Tarot, if you've read the guidebook, some of this might sound familiar to you as well. So the first thing I want to start by talking about is the question of why you might want to read reversals, and also the question of why you might not want to read reversals. A few months ago, I was reading Teresa Reed's new book. I've mentioned it a few times, Tarot, No Questions Asked. And when she's talking about reversals in that book, she points out that if you want to get tarot readers squabbling, just bring up reversed cards, because for some reason it is kind of a hot topic among tarot readers. People have very passionate opinions about this. So I want to start by acknowledging there is absolutely not a right answer or a wrong answer. Using reversals or not using reversals does not impact the quality of readings you can give. I truly have worked with readers, and I know readers who don't use reversals, who just don't resonate with that idea, and they give amazing readings. I know readers, and I've met readers who do use reversals, and they give amazing readings. So this is not something where there's a right way or there's a wrong way. It's really just about finding what suits your style, what suits your preference as a reader. So I am fine with any opinion. If someone commented, I posted yesterday, or a couple, I don't know when, time is weird, guys, but I posted on my feed on Instagram that I would be doing this workshop, and someone commented and essentially said that they feel that they can kind of hone into the energy of reversals without actually having a physically reversed card. So I know that's a really common belief, and if that is how things present themselves for you as a tarot reader, that's totally cool, that's totally valid. Okay, so I think some reasons that I would recommend maybe not reading reversals, well, first of all, is what I just talked about. If it just doesn't resonate with you, if you feel you don't need it, that's a great reason not to read reversals. Another good reason to maybe either choose not to read reversals or at least choose to set them aside for now would be if you are a beginner and if you are already feeling like you're taking on so much information and you just don't quite feel ready to add another layer of complexity. That's perfectly valid as well. Maybe you'll get to the point where you feel a little more comfortable, you feel a little more confident, and now you want to try reversals, and that's totally cool. Or maybe you'll just feel like, you know what, this doesn't speak to me, and you won't want to try reversals, and that's totally cool as well. But what we are here to mostly talk about today is if you do choose to try reversals, what are some ways you can approach that? So of course, I do read with reversals most of the time. I wanted to highlight that because this is something where I think it's important for me to remind you guys that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You might choose to approach things sort of the way I approach things, which is where I have a couple of decks that with those specific decks, for whatever reason, I just don't feel pulled to use reversals. So maybe there's certain decks that you won't use reversals with, but in general, you use reversals. Another thing that has kind of evolved for me, and this is something that's probably even evolved since I wrote that blog post about reversals a few years ago, is occasionally when I draw a card and it comes up reversed, I do just have an intuitive impulse to turn that card upright. There's something within me that says, okay, I don't need to see the physical reversal. I'm going to get the message I need from this card, even if I turn it around. So that's just a reminder. Again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's not like you have to be, I read reversals all the time, or I never read reversals. Maybe you'll sort of shift and move in and out of different approaches. Okay. So with all of that kind of preliminary stuff being said, the heart of what I want to go through is I want to share with you I'm trying to find my water bottle, because if you guys have been here for my lives before, you know that I always have to be drinking water when I'm talking a lot. It's the same thing if you've had a reading with me, if you've been a client of mine. I always have a water bottle with me. Okay, but again, the heart of what we'll be talking about is I'm going to explain my I say four, I'm holding up 8 fingers, my 4 main go-to frameworks for reading reversals. So these are the 4 main ways that I look at reversals, but they are not the only ways that I look at reversals. So as a bonus, after we go through these main 4 ways, I'm also going to quickly share with you some alternate frameworks. So you probably got this impression by now, but with the way I read reversed cards, the way that I think of it as is that it just puts a different lens on the card. Sometimes I've talked to people who are new to tarot, and one of the reasons they don't want to try reversals is they're under the impression that, I'm already learning 78 cards, and if I double that, now I'm learning, what is that, like 156? Then it's like they're totally separate meanings. Okay, that is not the way that I read reversed cards. For me, like I said a moment ago, the reversal just asks me to look at the card through a slightly different lens. So I think that is a much more, it just resonates more with me. Some of my older tarot books especially, I noticed that when they give meanings for a reversed card, it's very like doom and gloom. It's like the dark side of the card. That is not at all how I think about reversals. I just think about the same sort of core essence of the card, but it gives me an opportunity to look at that core essence of the card in a slightly different way. Okay. How are we doing so far, people who are here live? Hope we're doing good. I think I always have like a delay for a moment on my comments, and it makes me feel weird. But I see some hearts, so I think we're doing good. Excellent. Yes. Awesome. Okay, and people are still showing up, so hi to people who are still coming in for the live. Awesome. Queen of mental math, that's me. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Okay. All right, thanks guys. It makes me happy to see people being here, so that's really cool. Okay, so on to the 4 frameworks. Framework number 1 is resistance to the lesson. So this is a big thing. Let's talk about what resistance means. Hello from France. Hello, good evening to you. Thank you for joining. Okay, so when you have resistance to something, what does that mean? Okay, actually I want to go back. Because I should have talked about this before. Someone asked, how do you shuffle in reversals? For me, I'm just in the habit now of while I'm shuffling, I don't even really think about it, but every now and then, I split into 2 piles, and I'll turn one of the piles upside down, and then I'll shuffle a few times, and then I'll turn the other pile upside down. So I just kind of shuffle in a way that I'm naturally going to have some reversed cards mixed in. That's how I do it. All right, back to this framework of resistance. There's so many things we can mean when we talk about resistance. For me, generally when I see a reversed card and when I'm looking at it through the framework of resistance, it's not always that I can't understand what message the card is giving to me, but it's more that there's something within me that that is just not quite able to fully step into that lesson and fully say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. It's like I want to make excuses. I want to go the other way. I want to say, okay, I understand this card, but maybe I'm not actually acting upon the message it's giving to me. So that's usually how resistance manifests for me. It's like I know what the card is telling me, but I'm not really embodying that advice. So the reason that I think this is such a powerful framework for self-discovery goes back to a book I read a few years ago that has had a huge impact on me. It's called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. And one of the things that Steven Pressfield talks about in that book is he has this theory that the stronger resistance you have to something, the more crucial that thing is for your self-discovery, for your spiritual journey, for you stepping into a more purposeful way of living. So when I see a reversed card and when I feel intuitively that there is a resistance coming up to that, it's always a huge invitation for me to go deeper into that, because I know that 9 times out of 10, or probably even more than that, like 99% of the time, if I'm resisting the message of a card, the message of that card is extra important to me. So that's one of the main ways that I look at reversed cards, is that I'm having resistance, or perhaps the person that I'm reading for is having resistance to the message of that card. So this could be a whole huge topic in and of itself, but I wanted to add into that just a few ideas of, if you are reading a reversed card with the framework of there's some resistance coming up to this message, how can you kind of work with that? So I think just the fact alone that the reversal, that seeing the card upside down, gives you an actual reminder to notice the resistance, that in and of itself is a huge first step to softening the resistance, to moving through the resistance. When we're able to name something, when we're able to notice something, when we're able to be mindful of something, we automatically reclaim some of our power. And just that fact alone of saying to yourself, oh, this card is reversed and I have some resistance, that alone can start softening the resistance. So that's one of the reasons I think this particular framework for working with reversed cards can be very, very transformative and super powerful. Another thing that I don't do this all the time, but sometimes if I get a reversed card and I have the intuitive sense that there's resistance present, sometimes I will shuffle the cards again and ask for a card to give me some advice on how I can process, how I can soften, how I can move through that resistance. So that's a tool that you might want to sometimes turn to as well. Okay, so that is the first framework. Oh yeah, I know, actually I wanted to add as well, for each of these frameworks, I'm going to give a quick example. There's more examples on my blog if you're interested in going deeper into this. But with this first framework with resistance, this came up for me pretty recently when I did a reading for myself and I drew the Two of Swords reversed. Now, I knew what the message of the card was for me in that reading, which was that I needed to be listening more. I needed to open myself up to messages instead of being in this closed off space. So I consciously knew what the message was, and I even knew some things I could do. I had actually fallen way off my meditation practice. So I knew what I needed to do, but I had so much resistance to it. I was like, oh my gosh, every time it was time to meditate, I'd be like, oh, I need to go do the dishes. It's time to walk the dog. Like, the resistance was so strong. So that's an example of something that happened for me pretty recently, where I had a reversed card and I knew it was indicating resistance. And I have now finally gotten back into my meditation practice, and I am actually doing that listening. I was able to soften and move through that resistance. All right, I think that's it for that first framework. So let's talk about my second framework for interpreting reversed cards. This is the shadow. So in the first workshop that we did on Instagram Live, where I talked about the 4 styles of learning, of reading tarot, if you guys were there for that, you might remember I showed a book called Tarot and Psychology by Arthur Rosengarten. One of the central premises of that book is that each tarot card has an entire spectrum of meaning, and that spectrum of meaning ranges from light to shadow. Now, I want to be careful with these terms because they are not equivalent to positive and negative. Generally, the way that I think about them is the light aspect of a card are things that it's easier for you to see, and the shadow aspect are things that are harder to see, are a little more hidden, are sometimes they can be a little more difficult to process or difficult to work with. So sometimes when I see a reversed card, it asks me, what is the shadow aspect of this card, and how might that be present in what's coming up for me with this card right now? The example I have for this one is, I've seen this happen a couple of times, both for myself as well as for clients when I'm reading for them, where the Empress reversed will come up. And when I think about, this is just one possibility, but one possibility of the Empress reversed is when we are giving too much. You know, the Empress can be about being very generous, being very bountiful, but perhaps a shadow aspect of that is we are over giving, and we are sometimes even trying to kind of like fix someone, right? Fix a situation, be the person who makes everything better when that's not always our role to play. That's an example of something I've seen for myself and a couple of times seen for people I'm reading for, that ties into that idea of when is a card coming up in a shadow presence for us in a reading. One of the reasons, I should say, that I think this particular framework is really powerful is there's already a paradigm of shadow work. I think we talked about this even last week in our session, but shadow work is a Jungian concept, and it is something that's pretty popular among the witchy and tarot community, so some of you might already know about shadow work. But essentially the central premise of shadow work is going into the things about yourself that you are either harder for you to see or you would rather not see. So sometimes a reversed card, when it's asking us to look at that shadow lens of a card, ties into our own process of doing our own shadow work, which is a huge part of spiritual growth. Okay, so I think that's that for this. And this is each one of these frameworks we could seriously talk about for like an hour with each one, but I'm trying to be conscious of time, so we'll leave it there for now. Okay, so the third framework, or the third lens that I sometimes use for working with reversed cards, I see a lot more people are joining in. Hi everybody, we're talking about ways of looking at reversed tarot cards. If you are just showing up, thanks for joining us. Okay, way number 3 that I sometimes think about reversed cards is internal versus external. So generally for me, when I am reading for myself or when I'm reading for a client, my default interpretation is to look at how the cards talk about us. Look at how the card talks about me if I'm reading for myself. Look at how the card talks about you if I'm reading for you. So internal is generally my default way of interpreting a card. So sometimes when a card comes up in reverse, it asks me to sort of flip that default and think about how might this card actually be coming forward in an external way. Now, occasionally, that is my first impulse, is to look at how the card is coming forward externally. And by externally, I mean in the situation around you. So if that was the case, if my default was to look at a card externally, in that case, the reversal might ask me to flip it and look at how it's coming forward internally. So this is why I call it internal versus external, because this mode of interpreting a reversed card essentially asks you what would be your go-to or your default way. Would your go-to or default way be an internal or an external interpretation of the card? And how might you actually flip that and look at it the other way around? An example of this that has happened several times recently, I have had the Tower reversed come up several times recently. And again, this is one that has happened for me, and it's also happened for a few of my clients. And lately, when I've seen the Tower reversed over the past year, it's often asking me to look externally, because again, I mentioned usually my default is to look at things internally. So often when I see the Tower come up for myself or for a client, I'm thinking about where are there huge shifts taking place for you in your inner world. But with the Tower reversed, the way it's been coming up lately, probably surprising absolutely no one, but is that it often shows the impacts that this global pandemic has had on our lives. That is an external situation, and it is impacted everybody and everything. So that it has changed sort of these broader structures of society, right? So that has happened a few times recently where I've seen the Tower reversed, and it specifically, for me, activated that framework of this is an external energy. So hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of flipping the script. If your default was to go, this is happening within me, flip it external. If your default was looking at it outside, flip it inside. The reversal can ask you to do either one of those. Okay, I thought I was going to move on from that, but one more thing I wanted to mention, because I'm trying to specifically add some ideas about why I think each of these frameworks is so helpful for self-discovery. And with this one, it's really, really helpful for tuning in on the difference between what you can control, and I use control in a very loose sense, what you can influence maybe, and what you cannot influence. That's a huge spiritual lesson. So when you're able to hone in on, is this something that is mine? Is this an internal energy that I have some ability to shift or sway? Or is this an external energy that maybe I can have some impact over it, but it's not necessarily my responsibility. It's not something that I'm carrying. This framework can really help you with doing some fine tuning around that. Okay, let's see here. Okay, don't mind me. Gotta lean over and blow my nose. Nobody needs to be seeing that. Okay. So let's see, how have we gone through? I think we've gone through, so we've gone through 3. So we're on to the 4th one. And the 4th one is actually, this is probably the most common lens that I use for working with reversed cards. I call it the exclamation mark. The exclamation mark is exactly what it sounds like. It's just sort of, sometimes a reversal just asks you to pay extra attention to a card. And there's a few ways that might manifest more specifically. One way is that it might ask you to go beyond your first impression. So once you've been reading tarot for a while, a lot of us get our sort of stockpile of like, this is what this card means to me. This is how I interpret this card. And sometimes we can get into a bit of a rut where we're not really deepening and expanding and going in new directions in a reading. We're just sort of leaning on, this is what I know about this card. A reversal in that case can sometimes come in as a way of saying, hey, wait, there are infinite ways that this card can be interpreted. There is an infinite spectrum of meaning to this card. So a reversal can just be a physical sign, an exclamation point. Let's go deeper. Let's go beyond what your comfort zone with this card. And like I said, this is probably the most common way that I look at reversed cards. The example that I have for you with this one, recently I had the Five of Cups reversed come up with a client. And another thing I wanted to mention is I'm talking about all of these frameworks, and sometimes when you draw a reversed card, you will intuitively know right away which lens makes sense in this context. But sometimes you might sit with that card and you might need to go through a couple of different lenses of looking at the reversal before you land on one that's really like, oh yeah, wow, that's exactly what this card is saying right now. And that's what happened with this example. I was working with a client recently where we had the Five of Cups reversed come up in the reading. As I've mentioned in previous sessions, my readings are very conversational, and I often go into a card with a client and dialogue with them instead of me just saying, oh, this card means this. We sort of explore and have a curiosity, have a conversation about that together. And with this particular client, we went through a few of these different lenses for reversed cards. And when we got to the exclamation point for the Five of Cups, it was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what this is. Because in that situation, the exclamation mark on the Five of Cups was a reminder to that client that they couldn't spiritually bypass the difficult things they were going through. They were a naturally optimistic person, but they were dealing with some very heavy things. So in that instance, the exclamation mark was, it's okay to feel difficult emotions. You can't just, blast right through them. So that is just one example of something that recently happened with that exclamation mark with the Five of Cups. I already mentioned this, but one of the reasons I love this way of looking at reversed cards is, like I talked about earlier, it doesn't ask you to redefine the entire way you think about a card. It just reminds you that tarot is always full of surprises. There's always something new to discover in a card. There's always this huge sea of potential ways that you can sit with a card and ways you can think about a card. And sometimes that reversal is just a reminder to us, like, hey, let's expand this, let's open this up. Okay, so those are the four main ways that I read reversals. I mentioned earlier I was going to quickly go through kind of a bonus round, because although these are the ones that I usually find make sense for me, there are so many different ways. Sometimes I'm doing a reading and in that moment, something I've never even considered but in terms of a reversal comes up. So as with everything in tarot, this is very intuitive, and it really asks you to find what makes sense and what clicks for you. But just quickly, I want to go through a few other things that I've seen make sense for me when I'm interpreting reversed cards. The first one, I got this from Joan Bunning. I first learned tarot with her website and book called Learning the Tarot. And she talks about that sometimes a reversal is an indicator that the energy of that card is either too high or too low. So sometimes it's, wow, this is really blasting in, and maybe I need to do something to sort of calm it. Or maybe it's, okay, the energy of this card is here, but it's not quite as present, it's not quite as actualized as it wants to be, so how can I maybe open up to that? And some of these frameworks kind of overlap, right? Because that could overlap with the framework of resistance to some degree, or even with like the exclamation mark, everything like that. And then another common framework, I can't remember where I found this one, but this is pretty common. You guys have probably heard this before, but sometimes with reversals, it can indicate that either the energy of that card is just beginning to actualize, or the presence of that energy is just beginning to fade away. It's sort of moving into the past. Someone says the feed keeps freezing. People say that every week, at least one person. I don't know if it's my internet, because when I look at the replays, they've looked fine so far. Someone else says it's fine for them. So I apologize. I don't know why that would be. Okay, let's see. Did I have anything else I wanted to mention with that? Oh yeah, one more thing. And this is another one, like I said, a lot of these sort of overlap and they tie into each other. But one more kind of bonus way that sometimes a reversal comes forward is that the energy of the card is operating at an unconscious level, so beneath your surface awareness. That can be sort of similar to the shadow framework, but sometimes it asks us to really go into our deeper awareness, into our dreams, into our subconscious, and figure out, is this somewhere, even if at first, this one I think makes the most sense when sometimes a card comes up in a reading and you're just like, what? This doesn't make any sense at all. And if that happens and the card is reversed, that could be an indicator to think about, is this happening at an unconscious level? Is this energy unconscious for me? Okay, so that is the main stuff I wanted to go through. One more thing I did want to mention, because I think this is important, and I meant to mention this before I started diving into my main 4 frameworks. I came about these 4 ideas mostly based on, first of all, what I learned through Joan Bunning. And then the other thing that I did is when I was reading some of the first texts that I came across when I started tarot, like 78 Degrees of Wisdom, and I can't even think right now, but some of the earlier things that I read, they would give a whole section for reversed meanings, as opposed to having this idea of just having a different framework. So as I was reading people's thoughts on reversed cards, I would think about, what are the common themes when I see different tarot readers talking about the way that they look at reversals? What are some of the underlying themes? And these were some of the things I noticed. So that's how I kind of settled into these 4 frameworks that I've now been working with for a number of years. Okay, I think that is the heart of what I wanted to go through. So I'll open it up if anybody has questions, or if you have comments, if you have other thoughts on reversals, if you have other lenses or other ways of perceiving reversed cards that resonate with you, that you want to share with us, please let me know. Anybody? I see hearts coming through. Hopefully this was interesting. I say this every time, and I'm really trying to build up my skills of presenting live. I don't think it's necessarily one of my natural strengths, but I'm trying, and I think I'm slowly getting a little bit better over time, so I hope you learned something. Okay, let's see. We have, A. Perry says, this was so helpful. I've been so torn about reading reversals because so many explanations for them haven't resonated with me. I know, yeah, I hear that from a lot of people. Sometimes you just have to sort of experiment and find what works for you. An idea of experimenting is something I talk about in my blog post with reversals. So if you're kind of not sure if you want to make it a mainstay of your tarot practice, I would suggest giving it a try. I think on my blog I even mentioned, do it for a moon cycle. Start at the new moon, read reversals for that whole cycle every time you're doing readings, and then just see, does this click? Does this make sense, or do I just want to throw this out? And I also mentioned this earlier, but sometimes when you see a reversed card, don't put pressure on yourself to be like, I have to intuitively right away know exactly what this is telling me. I mentioned sometimes even now, and I've been reading professionally for many years, I sort of go through a few different options, and I let myself be curious, and I let myself explore to see which framework makes sense in that context. Okay, let's see. What happens when there is a reverse card in the negative position in the spread? Is it like math? I mentioned that one of the frameworks that is not as common for me, but is something I sometimes draw upon, is that idea of the energy of the card is there, but it's maybe now fading or moving out. And again, I don't want to ever spiritually bypass. Sometimes cards are difficult. Sometimes they do have difficult messages, especially when they're in a difficult position and it kind of feels like a difficult card. So I don't want to try and sugarcoat it. But for me personally, when something like that happens, that is something I will sometimes turn to as, this could actually be letting me know that this is fading away. Or this just popped into my head right now, but one thing that I might intuitively think about in a situation like that is that the reversal could be reminding you that you have more capability and more personal power for navigating the energy of that card than maybe you're giving yourself credit for. It could be something like, don't let yourself feel like you're just like a helpless victim of this or something like that. So it would really depend on the situation and on intuition, but I hope that gives you some things to consider. Someone says, thanks for your time. You're very welcome. Let's see, reverse about more inner situation or struggle versus external, kind of like the shadow comment. Yep, sometimes I see them that way as well. I mentioned that the inner or the internal versus external. Okay, is there any common thread between the decks that you don't read reversals for? I don't know. I don't know if there's a common thread. The main deck, and I actually haven't worked with this one for a while. I always think I'm pronouncing it wrong, but the Japri Tarot. That was the first deck that when I got it, I just had this strong knowing. It was like, nope, no reversals with this deck. And there wasn't really any rhyme or reason to it. It was just sort of this intuitive feeling. So I don't think there's a common thread. I have found, I mentioned at the beginning that sometimes when a card comes up reverse, I just intuitively feel like, okay, let's turn this around. I don't necessarily need that visual cue of the reversal. I don't know why, but I find that happens more often now that I'm using my own deck, the Spacious Tarot, maybe because I co-created that imagery, and so there's something in me, it's just like physically seeing the imagery upside down, I'm like, no, turn it around, so that's kind of funny. But yeah, I do find with the Spacious Tarot, I'm more common to just feel like I don't need the reversal. I do sometimes do reversals with that deck, but not as often. Hi, Shona. Shona says, I usually don't do them, but when I do, I try to look at the imagery and see what meaning is there. Yeah, certain decks work really well for that. Like sometimes when a card comes up in reverse and there's a human figure in the deck, it kind of changes what they're doing, what direction their body language is facing. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're talking about, but I think that's a really powerful reminder that sometimes it's actually visually in the imagery of the cards. Deborah says, you're a wonderful presenter. Thank you. Shona, you might try them. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Let me know if you do. Okay, and then let's see. Official Ace of Cups says, I've always read reversals because to me, the card doesn't tell the full story without its shadow. Yeah, I think, and I know a lot of people, I mentioned this at the beginning, but a lot of people say, I can still sense when to explore the shadow sides of that cards without seeing the reversal, but I think it can be really helpful having it there as an extra reminder. For me, that's not how everyone sees it, but I agree with you. Let's see, okay, Deborah says, when you have 6 reversals in a Celtic cross spread, does it sometimes feel like you or the person or situation has hit a wall? I'm actually really glad you asked that because this is another thing. I've been all over the place in my notes today, but I wanted to mention that when I look at a spread as a whole, I always begin by looking at the overall picture that's coming forward in the spread as a whole. And that's one of the things I do look at is, are there a lot of reversed cards? And usually for me, it's kind of similar to what you said. My unofficial feeling is if half or more of the cards are reversed, then I take note of that. This is another thing I learned back from Joan Bunning. I actually wrote down a quote from her that I wanted to read today, so I'm glad you asked that. She said, let's see if I can find it. Okay, she said, when many cards are reversed, your energies are low and the situation is not clearly defined. You may lack direction or feel blocked, discouraged, and restricted. So again, I never want to make it sound overly negative, but the way that I sometimes describe it to my clients when they have a lot of reversed cards, I sometimes describe it as almost brain fog. It just sort of feels like, I know these things are there, but I can't quite click them into place. Often I find that what helps them click into place is simply going through the reading. So even if there's some brain fog or you're feeling disconnected or you're feeling like you're hitting a wall when you begin the reading, by the process of going through the reading, hopefully it helps to lift some of that. Okay, hope that makes sense. How do I know when to start working with reversed cards? Okay, I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, but if you are brand new to tarot, I think you kind of need to trust where you're at in your process. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed, the last thing you need is one more thing. I'm always of the impression that working with tarot, I'm not going to say it should never feel challenging, because it does take us into some very big areas of self-discovery and inner exploration, and so it can feel challenging, but you don't want it to feel like a drag. You don't want there to be a bunch of pressure around it. So if it feels pressure, if it feels icky, if it makes you feel stressed out, don't do it. But if it feels like, oh, that's interesting, I wonder how that might feel, I wonder how that might change my readings, that's when you know you're ready to give it a try. Someone says, thank you, you're so welcome. I don't use reversals when the card back goes one way. Oh my gosh, Shona, that's a really good point. Yeah, that is one of my, I don't know if pet peeves, I don't know if I'd go as far as saying that, but I really like it when backs are reversible, because I like to have the option. Okay, I'm still going through catching up. I don't know how to pronounce that. Minciati. We have our expansion pack. I don't know if you guys have heard, but the Spacious Tarot is getting an expansion pack. It's based off Minciati, but I don't know how to say the word. Okay, I don't read Minciati reversals, but that's because they have almost 100 cards and already hard enough to work with. My decks often don't have backs that are reversible either. Yeah, so that's a perfect example of a situation where deck by deck, you might just think, okay, this is not the right thing with this deck. Sometimes with the majority of reversals, I feel like the cards are saying, not today, dear. Sometimes it can, and sometimes, I've had a few instances where I pull a spread, I'm doing a reading, and either because of the reversals or just for some reason, I feel like I can't quite tap into what the message of that spread is trying to convey. And that's okay. I've learned to not beat my head up trying to figure it out. Like I said before, there shouldn't be pressure. Sometimes you just need to let a spread sit and walk away from it. Again, whether it's because there's a lot of reversals or for any other reason. And what I often find is all of a sudden it clicks when I'm least expecting it. Like when I'm doing dishes, it's kind of a strange thing, but I've had that happen a few times where I do a reading and I'm like, oh, I don't get it, I just need to walk away. And then I'm doing dishes and not even thinking about it, unless I'm like, oh, that card was telling me this and that, and everything just clicks in. So sometimes you just need to let it rest. Okay. Someone says, sometimes when I get a reversal, I ask myself, what does it take to turn it upright? It doesn't work for every card, though. Ooh, I like that. I've definitely had similar conversations with my clients. Again, it's, I don't want to put it under a lens of a reversal is inherently negative. It has to be turned around. But with some of those frameworks, like especially the resistance framework, it is helpful to think, how can I, metaphorically and literally turn this upside up in terms of moving through, shifting, clearing some of that resistance. I like that. Okay, where am I? I think have I gone through everything? Yeah. Someone says, you're excited for the expansion pack? Yeah. Really quickly, I mentioned that already, but if you guys haven't heard, we are working on it. We announced that on the Spacious Tarot Instagram. It's going to be, I think, 21 additional cards. So it's going to have cards for the 4 elements, 2 of which we've already unveiled, and it will have cards for all of the zodiac signs, and then the remaining cards will be based off values. So in the older Minciati decks, they were based off the classical virtues. We are actually going to be updating that and using values that we feel reflect the vibe of the Spacious Tarot and reflect more of our modern sensibilities. So it's going to be hopefully fun. We're working on that. It's exciting to have a project on the go. Okay. I think I've gone through all of the comments and all of the questions, so thank you to everybody who has been here. That puts you right at the length of the deck. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was inspired by the Spolia Tarot, which is based off of the same system. So yeah, that's exciting. Oh, I have another question. Can you incorporate, try that again, reverse meanings in other oracle decks? I think you could. I do have a few oracle decks. I hardly ever use oracle decks, to be honest. A few years ago, I was using them more frequently, but I don't work with them that often. But I think you could. I don't see why you couldn't. It probably depends on the oracle deck. Yeah. Okay. I think we have gone through a journey. We've talked about some good things. I appreciate you being here. People are saying thank you. You are so welcome. I appreciate your support. And take good care, you guys. Next week, we are going to do the last, for now, I might keep doing these, I don't know, but the last official one that I have planned next Tuesday, same time, same place. We're going to be talking about Tender Tarot. I'm really looking forward to that. I could have actually really used something like that today because I'm going to be sharing some ideas of working with the cards when you feel tender, when you're experiencing some sorrow, when you're experiencing some difficulty, when you're feeling tender. What are some ways you can work with tarot? That's what we're going to talk about next week. So I hope to see some of you guys there. Okay, take care. I'll talk to you later. Oh no. How do I? Oh yeah. Okay, figured it out. Okay, bye.